fat causes heart disease. So they introduced margarine, and it's even got heart health tick on it, hasn't it? What is the FDA tick? So did that reduce heart disease? No, it didn't reduce heart disease. And so they introduced cholesterol-lowering medication. And probably, I think the figures are something like half the people over 60 are on cholesterol-lowering medication. Has that reduced heart disease? No. So then they came up with another idea that they will lower the figures on the correct cholesterol levels so that more people can go on cholesterol medication. Did that reduce heart disease? No. And what's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and get different results. So I'm going to be looking at a few of these things because what's our $1 million question? Why? Why are these things so? And the liver makes cholesterol according to the body's demands. And considering cholesterol, you might be interested to know that 80% of the cholesterol that the liver makes is made from glucose, and 20% of the cholesterol that the liver makes is made from fat. Information tells you it's not the butter on the bread, it's the bread under. So this was the triangle in the 1960s when I was doing common sense cookery classes at school. The bottom rung of the ladder in this triangle was meat and dairy. And the next was carbohydrates, which is all your grains. The next was fruit and veg. And the next was fats and sugars. And because of heart disease, they changed the triangle in about the 1980s. So in about the 1980s, because it was acknowledged the protective role that fruit and vegetables have, the bottom rung became carbohydrates. And the second bottom became fruit and veg. And because of the theory that fat causes heart disease, they put meat and dairy right up here. And they put fats and sugars up the top. So because of the theory that fat causes heart disease, the meat and dairy had to go right up there. The meat industry was not happy. The fruit and vegetables, they increased that because of the protective power of them and put in the carbohydrates. Has that helped? No, it's not at all. Now, I'm going to refresh your memory. We'll go back to the liver lecture, and we're going to have a look at the carbohydrates, because looking at the carbohydrates and how they're dealt with in the body, it helps to understand the triangle, and it helps to understand the cholesterol that's 80% from fat, 80% glucose, 20% fat. So let's define the carbohydrates. You've got cereal, you've got your breads, and you've also got, well, we put a whole list of cookies and donuts and pastries and muffins. You have those, pretzels. So we're just going to say cakes, etc. So your other high carbohydrate foods, pizza. I didn't know what pizza was when I was a little girl. That was in the 60s, but Pizza Huts abound now. Yes, Australia even has Pizza Hut. Pasta, it's everywhere. So these are some of the main carbohydrates that Americans and Australians, no matter where I go, are eating. And as we looked at the other day, these break down to glucose, the singular structure that gets absorbed into our blood, goes straight to our liver, and then the liver sends number one to the cell. Any leftovers get stored as glycogen. That's your quick release glucose stores. And number three, it gets stored as fat. Now, this also explains why 80% of the cholesterol is made from glucose, because of the breakdown in large amounts to the fat. So what is the best triangle? What should be on the brain? Fruits and vegetables. I'm going to say vegetables because if someone is a diabetic, as we'll see in our next lecture, if someone wants to conquer cancer, we looked at that on the first night, have to get those glucose levels down. So we'll put fruit here. For some fruit, large amounts is great, for some needs to lessen it. I'm only going to have 3 rungs on my triangle, which probably doesn't surprise you. Legumes. Legumes, as we looked at, are a third the carbohydrate that you'll find in grain. Seeds, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, grains I'm going to put up here so we don't overdo them. And up the top you've got your nuts, you've got your oils, you've got your maple syrup, you've got your honeys, concentrated foods. We don't need a lot of them. We do need them, but not a lot of them. And what that does, it supports what we looked at the other day, that the 3 essential food groups, we should be groups. So let's have a look at cholesterol. So you've got 2 main types of cholesterol, high density lipoprotein and low density lipoprotein. So HDL is called the good guy because HDL, it delivers cholesterol back to the liver. So if there's excess cholesterol in the blood, it'll take it back to the liver. Remember, that's where it's made. That's why it's called the good guy. LDL, it's called the bad guy. But remember this, the body doesn't make bad things. It has a role. What's its role? Its role is that of a repairer and a rebuilder. So you'll always find LDL where there's a need for repair or rebuilding. LDL does something else. It delivers cholesterol to the brain. And the brain is the fattiest organ in the body. Every cell has a membrane around it which is 50% fat, but not the brain cell, that's 70% fat. Now let's have a look at how these cholesterols work. Here's the bloodstream. Because of its low density, LDL is always on the edge. Because of its high density, HDL is always in the middle. In her book, Put Your Heart in Your Mouth, Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride, she spends the first 4 chapters investigating what damages arterial walls. They're lined with endothelium cells, and they're delicate cells. So what damages them? There are 4,000 chemicals in cigarettes. And even medicine acknowledges the role between smoking and heart disease. And those chemicals can damage those little cells that line the blood vessels. Mold, breathing in mold from a moldy house, or eating mold on food, getting mold into the body, if it gets into the bloodstream, it can damage the endothelium cells. Mercury. How can we be exposed to mercury? We can be exposed to mercury in the silver fillings in the mouth, in fish, and vaccines.
The flu vaccine has mercury, which means the COVID vaccine would have mercury. Mercury gets in and it can damage the endothelium cells. Who's going to plug up the holes? LDL, that's its job. It's right here on the edge, plugs up the holes. It's the repairer and the rebuilder plugging up the holes. Now, the person doesn't realise the damage of the chemicals. They don't realise the damage in the cigarettes. In Australia, they've got pictures of diseased lungs on the packets of cigarettes. So they have that here. They're pretty graphic. It's on every packet of cigarette. A lot of people don't realise the danger of a mouldy house. And the damage continues. Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride, she shows something else is adding to this. All through our blood, we've got little protein molecules. We've got too much glucose coming into the body on this high carbohydrate diet. One of the highest carbohydrates there is the refined sugar. So when too much glucose is in the blood, it connects to the protein molecules and becomes sticky. And those little sticky molecules stick on the walls. Here we are, sticking on the walls. And one of the main reasons for a heart attack or a stroke is when that sticky molecule dislodges and gets stuck in a narrow area. That's the #1 cause of a heart attack or a stroke. Is cholesterol cause of heart disease? No, it's just doing its job. The #1 cause of heart disease is damage to the arterial walls. To blame cholesterol for heart disease is like blaming the fire trucks for the fire. Well, they must be causing it. They're always there. Can you see that reasoning? It's just doing its job. That's why Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride, she spends 4 chapters looking in detail at all the environmental poisons contributing to the damage on the arterial wall, causing the cholesterol to plug up the holes. It's that simple. And adding to that the high carbohydrate diet, that is the #1 cause for these fatty molecules coming into the blood. Because when you understand what your body does with fat, there's your nuts and your seeds and your avocado, it goes straight into your lymphatic system. It doesn't even go into your blood. The only fat that goes into your blood is coconut, and that's actually burnt as fuel quite quickly. It's the triglycerides. You've heard of triglycerides? That stored fat from the high carbohydrate diet, that's triglycerides. That's your triglycerides. So let's have a look at what else I mentioned, and that is changing the cholesterol levels. So it was probably about 3 years ago, I met a nutritionist at one of the retreats I was running. She said, I've got the advantage of being a nutritionist for 40 years. She was 69. She said, I'm still working as a nutritionist. I work for a physician 3 days a week and I have my practice. She said, when I was at university 40 years ago, the levels then were 300. Under 300 was perfectly fine 40 years ago. They've changed the figures, she said. Now it's 200. Is that right? Actually, it's almost, you've got to be under 190. Is that right? And if you've got a cholesterol level of 190, they're going to say you've got to go on cholesterol-lowering medication. Am I right? And if you have a cholesterol level of 250, they basically tell you you're a walking, talking heart attack. Is that right? And if you don't do something, you're going to have a heart attack almost immediately. It's not true. So they put you on cholesterol-lowering medication. One of the most famous is Lipitor. We've got a book in our library. It's written by a physician and an astronaut. It's called Lipitor, Thief of Memory. And this astronaut and physician was in his early 50s. He went for his yearly blood test. And the doctor said, oh, your cholesterol's are a little high. I think they're 200. Go on this Lipitor to get it down a bit. 6 weeks later, his wife found him out in the garden, walking around. He didn't know who he was. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know who she was. The only thing different in their lives is that he was taking Lipitor. So he stopped it immediately. Within a few days, he was back to normal. 10 months later, he went to have his yearly blood test. Doctor, cholesterol levels were still a little high. They were still 200. I want you to go back on Lipitor. And he said, no way, mate, that stuff nearly made me go crazy. He says, that's very rare. What if you go on half dose? He went on half dose. 6 weeks later, his wife found him out in the garden, didn't know who she was, didn't know who he was, didn't know where he was. He stopped it immediately. Let me tell you the side effects of cholesterol medication. It might be Lipitor, it might be Crestor, it might be some of the statin drugs. Here are the side effects: dementia, Alzheimer's, memory loss, muscle wasting. You interested? They've just added another one. It's breast cancer, because our sex hormones are made from cholesterol. When I was in New Zealand a couple of years ago, a couple came to me. I think I'd been speaking all week. This was about the last night. They said, we need to do something. They were both in their 80s. The lady was very quiet. The man said, a week ago, we're about to put my wife in a psychiatric hospital. She's been forgetful. She's been doing things that are not like her. We wondered how we could manage her any longer. We heard your lecture on heart health. We stopped the cholesterol-lowering medication. She'd been on it for 10 years. He said, within 24 hours, we have my wife back. And they both started crying. Wow. So if you're on cholesterol-lowering medication and you stop it tonight, there will be a side effect. Your memory will return. How many people blame age? So if you're 250 cholesterol levels, I've got some good news. The Framingham Heart Study, it was set up, little town in Framingham, been going for 35 years, looking at 30,000 people, some die, more come on. And they set it up to prove that cholesterol causes heart disease, but it hasn't. And I love this study, not funded by the dairy industry or the grain industry or the meat industry or the pharmaceutical company. You won't find many studies that are not biased. But it did find one thing. It found that people with high cholesterol levels don't get Alzheimer's. Because the brain is the fattiest organ in the body. It loves fat. Look what LDL does. It delivers cholesterol to the brain. The brain uses it for food. You see, fat, it burns at 9 calories per gram, whereas glucose, it burns at 4 calories per gram. And our brain cells consume 15 times the fuel of any other cell. And that's why it loves fat. So can you see, when you restrict fat, when you're on cholesterol-lowering medication, that's a recipe for Alzheimer's. God never meant the brain to deteriorate. No, I haven't read about it in the Bible, have you? And before the flood, there were men that lived 850 years. No Alzheimer's. We've got the same bodies, we've got the same brain. That's why this should ever be on the tip of our lips. Why are these things so? We should ever be investigating. I believe we should be our own doctors. Your doctor, your specialist, your nutritionist, your naturopath, they're your advisors. And what can you do with that advice? You can say, thank you so very much for your advice. I'll seriously consider it. So as you can see, we need the fat, but we need the good fats. There's a book called Fats That Heal, Fats That Kill by Udo Erasmus. And he shows that there are fats that are killer fats. But how many people have thrown all fat out, also thinking that fat causes heart disease? Do you know it's never been proven? So what are the killer fats and what are the good fats? The good fats are fats that come from the hand of the Creator. The olive oil and the coconut oil, easily made from the flesh of the plant. If they're easily extracted, they're not destroyed. But about 100 years ago, high heat and chemical equipment was developed to be able to extract oil from hard seed. So the oil from the hard seed is destroyed in the extraction process. So there's all your polyunsaturated fats. And what have we been told? Stop the saturated fat, is that right? Eat the polyunsaturated fats. Polyunsaturated fats are excellent fats if you eat the food and get them, if you eat the seeds and the nuts. But if they're extracted early, the heating extraction process destroys it. So the dangerous fats are your altered fats. Margarine isn't altered fat. Cooking in these vegetable oils, heating alters them. The only oils I use are olive oil, first cold pressed extra virgin, and coconut oil. It's basically whatever your palate tells you. Personally, I like the taste of olive oil, coconut oil, but our Fijian cook we had for many years, everything had coconut oil in it. We love the flavour, but we need the good fats. I'm not suggesting you drink a cup of olive oil a day. I don't think anyone could. Can you see what I'm saying? We must be reasonable. They're right up the top. They're important. You only have a little bit, and we're glad because they're expensive. You only need a little bit. How many olives make a little bit of olive oil? How many bees to make a little bit of honey? They're concentrated foods. You only need a little bit, but you do need that little bit. I have several books in my library at home to illustrate the things I've just been telling you. I mentioned one. It's Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, Put Your Heart in Your Mouth. And she explains the things I'm explaining to you today. Then there's a couple of cardiovascular surgeons. This is an ebook and it's by Dr. Dwight Lundell. His book is called The Great Cholesterol Lie. Then there's Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. Dr. Malcolm Kendrick's book is The Great Cholesterol Con. Then you've got Peter Dinkel's book, The Great Cholesterol Deception. Then you've got Johnny Bowden's book, The Great Cholesterol Myth. We're running out of words. This isn't just one author, and two of them are cardiovascular surgeons. One of them has performed 10,000 bypasses, and he's written a book, The Great Cholesterol Lie. It's not cholesterol. It's damage to the arterial wall. Can you see that? That's common sense when you look at it, isn't it? So where did this theory come from that fat causes heart disease? Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, in his book, The Great Cholesterol Con, he said it has never been proven. And yet, what are we told? Fat causes heart disease. And this is a sentence I memorised because I thought it was so well out of his book. For the first time, normal levels of a normal vital body substance is being called a disease. That's cholesterol. We need it. We need it to make our sex hormones. We need it in our brain. We need it. If we don't have enough, our brains start to fail. In Australia, 1,700 cases of Alzheimer's is being diagnosed weekly. There's something terribly wrong there. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be there. And there's multiple factors that can come and cause that. I'm going to touch on it on Saturday morning when I look at the brain. We've got a 2-part lecture on Saturday morning on the brain. And I'll be touching on Alzheimer's. I'll be showing you how to rewire your brain. Doesn't that sound good? So let's have a look at how we can prevent heart disease. I like to establish my case first so that you know why. So number one, we need to be having the 3 essential food groups. We need to be having a high fibre diet. That's everything in the plant kingdom. We need to be having generous proteins. Your best proteins are your plant proteins. There's your legumes, your nuts, your seeds. And we need to be having adequate fats, not your altered fats. If you do cook, if you want to fry in a little bit of oil, personally I don't, but I know some of our cooks like to put a bit of, fry the garlic and the onion and the ginger in a little bit. Use the coconut because heat doesn't destroy coconut. 3 essential food groups. Now there are some things that must stop. So what must stop is anything that will harm not only the heart, but also the blood and also the heart function. And you might be surprised to know that one of the main causes of heart arrhythmia is caffeine. You see, when caffeine goes into the body, there's a crisis response. What happens in a crisis is the same thing that happens when you have a cup of coffee. And so the heart is affected. What also is another cause of heart arrhythmia is the hybridized wheat. The wheat was changed in the 50s and it created a protein or a gluten structure that is incredibly complex, not easy for the gut to break down. And when you get disruption with digestion, it can certainly affect the heart. What also must stop is tobacco and refined sugar. Refined sugar harms everything and is a big contributing factor to damage in the arterial wall. Also important is salt. Stopping salt? No. That's a misconception. If someone has heart disease, what are they told? Stop the salt. Well, I do agree with stopping table salt. You see, seawater is the highest source of sodium, is that right? But it has 92 minerals. And of those 92 minerals, 30% is sodium and 50% is chloride. So sodium chloride makes up the largest amount. So when they leave that grey slurry, bleach it white, and add aluminium to it, there's your table salt. And what that does is that imbalance in minerals causes an imbalance in and out of the cell, which has an effect to raise blood pressure because it raises the pressure inside the cell. Let me show you. Here's the cell. There's a bilayered membrane around the cell, and there are sodium potassium pumps in that membrane. The highest concentration of mineral inside the cell is potassium. The highest concentration outside the cell is sodium. So when a person is having no potassium, where's potassium found? In all your fruits and vegetables. So let's say someone's not eating any fruits and vegetables, they're just on the high carbohydrate diet and meat. So they're having no potassium and they're shaking this table salt on everything. Did you know that those minerals are so harsh they kill the taste buds? No wonder they've got to shake it on everything. Their taste buds are dying. Have you noticed they put it on and they haven't even tasted whether the food needs it? So what's happening now? Sodium levels are rising, potassium levels are dropping. These sodium potassium pumps are unable to keep up the balance, and osmosis and diffusion happens when the highest concentration merges into the lowest. See, there is a little bit of sodium inside the cell, but when the sodium merges in and rise, that causes the cell to swell. There's your high blood pressure. Something else happens. And this happens with the Celtic salt. You see, Celtic salt, we'll do it over here. Celtic salt, it contains 82 minerals. That's pretty close. Where are the other 10? They're in such pico proportions, barely measurable, that they're lost in the evaporation process. Himalayan salt, it's pretty close. It has 75 minerals. But what I like about the Celtic salt is it has 3 magnesiums. It has magnesium bromide. It also contains magnesium sulfate and magnesium chloride. And this explains why Celtic salt is such a wet salt, because magnesium is a water-hungry molecule. Have you noticed that? It all clumps together. That's the 3 magnesiums. So when you put a crystal of Celtic salt on your tongue, give it a little chew, and then have some water, the mucous membranes in the mouth absorb the minerals, the magnesium is taken to the cell, and then you have a glass of water, the magnesium pulls the water inside the cell. So the quickest way to hydrate a body is to have that little bit of salt before that glass of water. In that membrane, there's a little motor. And when the water rushes through that membrane, it causes the motor to spin, and that gives us a unit of energy. So when you're feeling tired mid-morning, mid-afternoon, have your Celtic salt and your water. Something else is happening with the cell, and this affects blood pressure. Calcium is a very important mineral, and tomorrow night, when we look at bones, we're going to look at calcium in detail. But calcium can't get into the cell by itself. It has to have vitamin D. When vitamin D is present, it pulls the calcium in. Something else happens, and we'll look at this after the break, when we look at diabetes. Glucose can't get into the cell by itself. It needs insulin. When insulin's present, the glucose gets pulled inside the cell. Let's say you've got someone who's not drinking enough water, they're not having any greens, they're not having the whole salt, the water can't get in. The person thinks that the sun's going to give them skin cancer, which actually is not true. So they're not going out in the sun. So they're not getting vitamin D, so the calcium can't get in. And they're on a high carbohydrate diet, having too much glucose, overworking the pancreas, as we'll see after the break. And so the body stops making so much insulin, so the glucose can't get into the cell, and the body says, what are we going to do? And then it comes up with the idea, I know, we'll just force it into the cell. What's that? High blood pressure. So high blood pressure can be a result of dehydration, lack of minerals, lack of sunshine, and a high carbohydrate diet. And that's why salt is so important with high blood pressure. Dr. Lilangri is a French doctor who's written a whole book on salt. And he says when someone with high blood pressure comes into his office, he puts them on the Celtic salt. Because the Celtic salt has all the minerals that balance out. It balances the pressure in and out of the cell, whereas table salt causes the imbalance. So part of stopping is table salt. The doctor's right, it does play a large contributing factor in high blood pressure. So when we say salt, we mean the whole salt, either Celtic or Himalayan salt. Number 4, low carbohydrate. Go for the low carbohydrate diet. Carbohydrates are bad when they're overdone. Of course you can have some grain, but don't have a whole plate of grain. Number 5, water. We need to be having at least 8 cups of water a day. They're 8 glasses. When we're dehydrated, the blood gets thick. And when the blood gets thick, it's harder for the heart to pump it. Keep your blood nice and thin by drinking adequate water. No need for aspirin. They're documented today that the side effect of aspirin, 3 things. It can cause brain bleeds, stomach bleeds, and eye bleeds. Well, what can we do instead of aspirin? Drink adequate water. Have your salt. And let me list some blood thinners. Remember Psalm 104, verse 14? God gave herbs for the service of man. One of the best blood thinners, and we looked at this on Tuesday night when we had our natural remedy seminar, cayenne pepper. You'll get used to the warmth. But cayenne pepper not only thins the blood, it does 3 things. It thins the blood, it opens the capillaries, and it strengthens the arterial wall. It's a healer. Another fantastic blood thinner is garlic. Put it in everything. Put some olive oil, Celtic salt and lemon juice in a jar, crush some garlic, shake it, great dressing. Gets better every day. Also ginger. Ginger's very nice in stir fries. It's really nice with your beans. Grating it finely and pouring boiling water on it. Have you tried it yet? Delicious tea. But remember, your best blood thinner is just water. Drink adequate water. If you're not used to water, start small. This is what I do. I drink half a glass of water when I wake up. I go to the bathroom, drink another half glass of water, get dressed, another half glass of water, pray, have another half glass of water, read my Bible. Do you see what I'm doing? Little by little, you spread it out over the day. And as I begin every glass, I have that little bit of salt. Have a tiny bit just before each glass. I ask you, what's a baked potato without salt? What's tomato and avocado on sourdough bread without salt? Our palate tells us we need a little salt. And the Bible talks about salt. It's found in Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. You are the salt of the earth. If the salt has lost its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is henceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under foot of men. Strong words. If the salt has lost its savour, it's Old English. I'd like to suggest that table salt has lost its savour. It's lost 90 minerals. And then the Bible says it's now good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under foot of men. Now, this was really brought home to me when I was in Wisconsin a couple of winters ago, and they throw salt on the road to melt the ice so you can drive on the road. And I thought of that. It's now good for nothing, yes, throw it on the road to melt the ice or disperse the ice. So that's the true story of salt. But one of the best heart strengtheners is exercise. You just got to find out what suits you. It's not negotiable. If you want a strong heart, you've got to move. Because the more you exercise, the more you move, the stronger your heart gets. I'm going to give you a story to illustrate. My son Peter, it's about 5 years ago now, he was training for a triathlon. He was running up and down the hills behind Brisbane. And that's interval training, running up the hill, walking down the hill, running up the hill, having a rest down the hill. Now, he was a tiler. About that time, he was dismantling a vanity unit, an old one from the 50s, and it was broken. And as he moved it, it slipped and went straight under his ankle. In fact, if he hadn't had a bone there, it might have cut his foot off. And the blood hit the roof. And he yelled out to my elder son, James. James says, I'm on the phone, mate. Peter says, help. So it was a few minutes before James went into the bathroom, little bathroom. James said blood was just sprayed beautifully all over the ceiling and the walls. And he bound it up, took him to hospital. And the nurse kept taking his pulse, 52 beats per minute. Why was it 52 beats per minute? Because Peter's running up and, mind you, Peter didn't run up and down hills anymore and didn't do his triathlon. But running up and down those hills had strengthened his heart to the point where his heart was so strong it didn't have to beat much. And his heart was so strong that every time it beat, it gushed the blood to the point that it hit the roof. Now, if his resting heart rate had been 70 beats per minute, the blood wouldn't have hit the roof. Can you see that? It would have gone boom, boom, instead of gosh. So we actually are the ones that are in control of the strength of our heart. Now, you may not be able to run up and down hills like Peter did, but most of the research on interval training has been done on exercise bikes. Exercise bikes can be very handy because they're inside, rain, hail or shine, you can do it, and you're holding on. So people with ankle, knee, hip problems, people that can't run, they can hold on and they go for their life and then they rest. And the research is showing that the most effective interval training, so your high intensity, is done for 30 seconds. Now that doesn't sound very long, does it? Try it. When you get to 20 seconds, your body's going to say that's enough. When you get to 25 seconds, it's going to say this is ridiculous. 30 like you're dying, you've got there. And then you can have recovery. Now, if someone's very fit, their recovery might be 90 seconds. If they're not very fit, the recovery might be a few minutes. And you do it for a cycle, usually for a cycle of 6. Now, have you done the maths on that? That's about 15 minutes a day. We all have 15 minutes. If you don't think you've got 15 minutes, it's time to do an assessment of your time. We've got 24 hours in a day. How many lots of 15 minutes is that? I'm not a mathematician, but it's a lot. And it's the best health insurance policy you can make. The dividends you receive far exceed the effort that you put into it. Most people today have a very busy lifestyle, but they can do 15 minutes, yeah? They can do 15 minutes. For some, it might be swimming. Not everyone can swim or has the availability of a swimming pool. It might be rebounding, the little trampoline that you can just start like this. And then as you can just start like this, and as you get used to it, you can go further and further. And it's a very powerful exercise. It's the only exercise that affects every single cell in the body. So exercise, I'm going to put here at NN. You know what NN means? Not negotiable. You just got to do it. So we're coming up to number 8 here, and there's a herb, and its action is to strengthen the heart, and its name is Hawthorn Berry. Hawthorn Berry directly affects heart function. And if the blood pressure is low, it'll bring it up. And if the blood pressure is high, it'll bring it down. It balances. Remember what herbs do? They serve your body. They work with the needs of your body. And it has an effect to bring the heart beat back to normality. So it's an excellent herb. Arrhythmia. We've seen many come off their blood pressure medications going onto the Hawthorn Berry. It's a very safe herb. It can be used in conjunction with blood pressure medication. At Living Springs Retreat last week, we saw, I think, 4 people stop their cholesterol medication, their blood thinning medication, and their blood pressure medication. And we took their blood pressure. It was fine. One guy stopped, and after 2 days we took it, and it was 150 on 85. That's pretty good. So your systolic is your high and your diastolic is your low one. So they do not like your diastolic to go above 90. What's ideal blood pressure? An ideal blood pressure is between 110, 120 over 75, 80, 85.
The dose on the Hawthorn Berry?
Dose on the Hawthorn Berry. I'll give you the highest dose. It's probably 6,000 milligrams. I would suggest 6,000 milligrams if someone's blood pressure's 160 on 95. And as they implement all of this and the blood pressure comes down, they can ease off this. But you know what I'd ease off first is the medication. We had one lady come to us, and she was 180 on 100, and she was on 3 medications. And I said to her, well, it's obvious they're not doing it. I have no authority over someone's medication. I say to people, only you and your doctor have, but if I were you, I'd stop your last 2 and just stay on the one you've been on for a while. So she did. We had her on 6,000 milligrams a day. It's very safe herb, very safe. She began to implement all this. Exercise was very, very hard. She would have been easily 250 pounds. So she was very large. So the exercise bike, she could only just do a little bit of that. She emailed me, 3 weeks after the program. She said, I'm feeling so good. She said, I went to the doctor and my blood pressure was 150 on 95. She was quite excited. She thought that was pretty good. It's not perfect, but she's getting there. She said he got really angry with her. And she said to him, listen, mate, that's how we talk in Australia. My blood pressure was 180 over 100 on your medication. So to me, this is pretty good. She said he stopped because what she said was right. But as she loses weight, as she implements this, her blood pressure will come down. And as it comes down, she can stop the last medication. And if it goes up a bit, she can up the Hawthorn Berry a bit. Can you see? Can play with it like that. And then eventually, as it comes down, she eases off the Hawthorn, little by little. And eventually, she won't need that. If she goes to a stressful situation, blood pressure goes up, what does she do? Go back on the Hawthorn Berry. So you can play with it. Remember, it's a very safe herb. You can make a tea out of it, and you can drink the tea, or you can take it in tablet form. A lot of people like tablet form because it's a lot easier to take. They can travel with it and keeps their eye on the dosage. So just before we close and have a break, I'm going to give you the story of a man that came to our retreat. And this man was 69. He was a retired judge, and he was on 6 medications. He was on blood thinner, blood cholesterol, high blood pressure medication, blood sugar medication. He was also on medication for gout and medication for stomach ulcer. We put him on the Hawthorn Berry, probably not quite 6,000. We probably had him on about 4,000 milligrams. We also put him on something that relaxes the heart at rest, and that is magnesium. So when someone's wanting their blood pressure to come down, magnesium can play a role. So this is number 9, magnesium. So we had him on probably 2,000 milligrams a day. And that's magnesium citrate. At the end of the week, by the way, I asked him if he wanted to stop his meds. He said, no, thank you very much. I'm very happy with my meds. I always respect everyone's choice. So he didn't stop his meds, but 4 months later, I get a phone call. He said, Barbara, I'd like to visit. I want to buy some more Hawthorn berries. I want to help some of my friends get off their medication. When I opened the door, I did not recognize Henry. So he'd lost 20 kilos in 4 months. That'd be what, 40 pounds. He'd lost his quite large stomach. He said, look, I can do my coat up now. He said, I have a few stories for you. He said, I went to the doctor 2 weeks ago to have my blood pressure taken, and the doctor got up and went to walk out of the room. And Henry said, what are you doing? He said, the machine's broken. Henry said, why do you say that? He said, well, your blood pressure's 120 on 80. That's not true. Your blood pressure's 180 on 90. That was not. Henry said, that's my blood pressure now. The doctor took him off all his medication because his blood sugar's normal, his blood thinning's normal, his blood pressure's normal, his blood cholesterol's normal. He has no more gout and no more stomach ulcer. That's impressive. I think it's an interesting story because we find some people choose to stop, but some people are a little cautious and would like to work with their doctor, and that's perfectly fine. His doctor took him off everything because if he didn't, Henry'd start passing out because the drugs come in and say, I'm going to do this whether you need it or not. They don't work with you. They just do. It's what drugs do. They just do because they're an alien to the body, whereas the herbs work with the body. He said, and I don't have to have my knee replacement anymore. Doctor said that because I've lost the weight, there's not pressure on the knees. He was a happy man. I think he was almost considering going back to court because he felt so good. Our retirement years should be enjoyable ones, isn't that true? In fact, I believe our retirement years should be productive years because those going into retirement have so much experience to share, and it's such a pity So that much of that is lost because the people are sick. The Proverbs 4:23 says, keep the heart with all diligence, because out of it are the issues of life. What's the issue of life? There's your plant. So keep the heart, keep it strong, keep those arteries nice and clean through exercise, through adequate water, through the herbs, through the diet and lifestyle, and prevent heart disease. And if you have it, you can turn it around. That's the good news. So we're going to have a break now. It is 7:05. So please have a 5-10 minute break. And when we get back, we're going to have a look at the causes and the cure for diabetes. I'm not sure of the American figures, but I know Australian figures, 500 new diabetics are being diagnosed every day in Australia. There was no diabetes on the planet till sugar was well established, the refined sugar. And there's a little book called Sugar Blues by William Duffy, and he gives the story of sugar. And he shows that there was no mention of diabetes in Hippocrates' writings because there was no diabetes. See, what sugar does, it gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast, and then you get this corresponding dump. So what happens when the blood sugar level goes up very high, very fast? And with sugarcane, it's so bound up in fibre and minerals that you don't get the spike. You don't get the spike. But the pure crystallized acid that's been extracted from the sugar cane plant, there's nothing to slow it down. The blood sugar levels rise dramatically. And then very quickly, the brain says to the pancreas, quick, release glucagon. So let's have a look at the pancreas. Here's pancreas, and it lives under your left rib, and it releases insulin, and insulin's designed to get the blood sugar level down.
See, her reasoning powers have been drastically compromised. She buys it, she feels a little guilty, so she's going to get a movie on the way home to take her brain away, and there's this low-fat chocolate on special, she'll just have a square. By the end of the movie, the pizza's gone and the whole block of chocolate is gone. On Saturday morning, I'm going to show you in the brain where this is happening, but what I want to do now is I want to be having a look at what's happening in her pancreas. She wakes up in the morning, how does that lady feel? Not very good. What does she do to give herself a pick-me-up? Cup of coffee. She's really going to go on a diet today. So she only has half the grapefruit instead of the rice cake as well. Isn't this what happens? Punishment comes. She's in the car and she's driving out to a property and her blood sugar levels are dropping. And her brain says, quick, pancreas, release the glucagon. Pancreas said that pizza and that chocolate did it for us last night. We're done. Oh dear. We've got a few things that will get the blood sugar level up. One is the glucagon, but remember, that's exhausted. So quickly, the brain now goes to the adrenal glands, which release adrenaline, which release noradrenaline, and release cortisol. Now they're your flight hormones. So the adrenaline releases from the adrenal glands. Its role is to release fat stores to give us glucose in a crisis. But the adrenal glands say, that chocolate last night did it for us, glucose. but the lady hasn't exercised for 10 years and the human growth hormone's forgotten what to do. It does nothing. Okay, we've got one more thing, and that's the thyroid gland to release thyroxine. You see, the thyroid gland controls metabolism. So when metabolic rate goes too low, thyroxine is released, which release the fat stores to give glucose. But the lady's been on the pill for 25 years, which has opposed thyroid function, and nothing happens. Where does that lady stay? Down low. Can you see that God made the body one hormone to get the blood sugar level down, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hormones to get it up again? Because if we stay down there and pass out, is that right? And many are sick through ignorance. She's exhausted all of the backup systems without even realizing it. Isn't that true? So many are sick through ignorance. She can't stop because she's way out the bush. So she pushes on. She pushes on. Brain is failing fast. It's lost its fuel. You know, there's only a 2-minute supply up there. She finally gets to a little town and there's a corner shop. She rushes in. She's walking like this. She rushes over, opens the fridge, gets a Coca-Cola out. She looks every little bit like a drug addict, is she? She actually is in every sense of the word. It's kicking in. She buys a whole packet. Now, however you buy them, I never buy them. Goes and pays and gets out. The guy behind the counter's looking out at her car. It's actually up on the gutter. Remember, she wasn't in a good state. The whole town starts talking. This is a very reputable community. It's not a happy picture, and yet and you know what happens now? She goes to the doctor, tells him, and he says, you've got depression. We'll look at that on Saturday morning. The 2 organs that are directly affected are the brain and the pancreas. The pancreas is designed to give a constant, steady supply of fuel to those brain cells. This is headquarters. But when the pancreas goes down, can you see the brain suffers? In fact, they're calling Alzheimer's diabetes type 3 because of the effect it's having on the brain. Our brain needs that steady supply of fuel. When that pancreas is not working well, the blood sugar's going like this. When it's up there, the brain's lights off. When it's down there, what is it? Lights are on, no one's home. No wonder they're calling. Can you see from what I'm showing you, there are a lot of factors that come into play with sick. So when we eat food, it all breaks down to glucose. The glucose goes into the cell and it goes through a 20-step pathway. This 20-step pathway gives us 2 units of energy. The end result of the 20-step pathway is a chemical form of glucose called pyruvate. Pyruvate, as the chemical form of glucose, gets fed into what's called the powerhouse. It's called the powerhouse because this 8-step pathway delivers a whopping 36 units of energy. We also looked at the fact that this pathway up here has no oxygen, whereas this pathway has oxygen. That's what makes the difference. High carbohydrate diet. First of all, the glucose is sent through the energy pathway in the cell, but we've still got a lot left over, so now it is stored like a little bunch of grapes. And these little molecules are glucose. So glycogen is a name given to quick release glucose stores. Now on the high carbohydrate diet, we've still got glucose left over, and so now it is stored as fat. Fat is the most amazing fuel in the human body. Isn't that what fat is? It's stored fuel.
And the reason why I call this glycogen stores the best kept secret for the diabetic is when the blood sugar levels go low, you don't need to suck on a lolly. We call it candy, right? All you need to do is access these little molecules of glucose which are already in the cell. How do we access them? We increase the cell's need for them. How do you do that? You exercise. Let me give you the story of a young man that came to our retreat. His name was Dan. He was type 1 diabetic. He got his diabetes at the age of 15 from a strong course of antibiotics. Sorry, I feel like I'm going to sneeze. I don't want to sneeze into my microphone. I think I'm okay. It had damaged the cells in his pancreas. So he'd had this for 4 years. So happened when he was 15, came to us at 19. He's a little bit overweight because that's what insulin does. Insulin has a one-set line. It says, I must store, I must store. When the glucose gets into the blood and the insulin's released, the insulin takes the glucose out of the blood, puts it in the cell, or as glycogen, or stores it as fat. It stores it. One day, Dan told me that his blood sugar levels in the morning were 3. Now, I know your readings are a little different. Your scale, is different. So I'm going to give you Australian scale. So a normal blood sugar level would be 6.5. A diabetic might get up to 13, 14, 15, 16, too high. He woke up in the morning and his blood sugar was 3. That's nearly passing out. Remember, it should be 6.5. He had some water, didn't tell anyone, put his joggers on, had another glass of water, and then went for a high-intensity interval training, running up hills, down, running up, down. Came back after 20 minutes, took his blood sugar level, it was 9. Where'd that come from? He'd had nothing to eat. Where'd that come from? His glycogen stores. They're already in the muscle cell. So if the blood sugar level's down, have some salt, glass of water, get on the exercise bike, and then test it again. Do you see why I said it's the diabetic's best secret? But if he's running up too many pills, all his glycogen levels, his glycogen stores run out, well, he's got this. So his fat stores. Now, Dan told me this later. He was with us 4 weeks, 2 weeks in the garden, 2 weeks program. He said the first week he was with us, if he had a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, he'd take out, we call it candy, lolly, in the middle of the night. That'll get it up. But you know, it always gave me a headache because it got up too fast, too high. Then of course you get the corresponding dump. He didn't know any better, that's what he'd been told to do. He felt convicted he shouldn't do that. So after a few nights he decided if it went low, he'd get up and get an apple. It takes a long time to eat an apple in the middle of the night, but that would get it up. But he didn't get the headache because it didn't go up so high. 3rd week, after listening to the lectures a couple of times, if he got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, he'd get up and do 30 push-ups. And get it up. Because he'd access his glycogen stores. When he went home, he'd gone from 90 units of insulin a day down to 10 units a day. That's type 1 diabetic. He was told his pancreas was dead. I said, is it gangrene? It was dead. It's not dead. The Bible says in Leviticus 17:11, the life of the flesh is in the blood. If there's blood going through, it's alive. And it has the capacity to even become more alive. The fact that he was down to 10 units of insulin a day, what does that tell you? His pancreas was starting to work as it was getting the right conditions. The body will heal if it's given the right conditions.
So before I show you how we can manage this, and I think you're getting the idea anyway, I want to tell you about Bobby. Bobby, he came to us at Living Springs probably about 4 years ago. He's 62. He had diabetes, he had heart disease, he was on blood thinners, blood cholesterol. He said to me, I've spent $1 million on my health in the last 10 years. My doctors have just told me they can do no more for him. When they brought him in from the plane, he flew there, he was in the wheelchair. He said the last thing the doctors did was they took the lymph nodes out of his groin to see if they could find out why he had diabetes. Can't understand that one. So if the lymph nodes from your groin have gone and you go in an aeroplane, what happens to your legs? They've swollen right up. That's why it was in the wheelchair. Just spent $800 on these fancy bandages. I said, you won't need the bandages. I said to him, what I want you to do is get on the little rebounder for 1 minute every hour, because that swelling is then fluid. And even though he's lost the lymph nodes here, he can stimulate other lymph nodes to compensate. I said, I'd like you to walk barefoot on the grass to stimulate the feet, to stimulate the legs. He was unable to walk with the other guests yet. He didn't drink a lot of water, so he started to drink more water, little by little. How many people with swollen legs said, look at my legs, I've already got too much water? Often it's because they don't have enough water going through their kidneys that the body will store it. He wasn't on any salt, so he started to have just a little salt. He was able to stop his cholesterol, his blood thinning. He was able to halve his blood pressure medication. And this is what we did. He had a very low carbohydrate diet. And the food that he was eating was low GI. Are you familiar with the glycemic index of foods? The glycemic index of foods is how quickly that food converts to sugar in your blood. So 55 is considered the baseline. So anything under 55 is low. So I'll give you an illustration. So 26 is cherries. In fact, just about all berries. 25 is grapefruit. Sugar sits at about 59. I think banana sits up there too. So I was having a lot of low GI, mostly low GI foods. So that's sweet potato instead of potato. Sweet potato sits at I think in the late 40s. Potato sits up here. Kiwi fruit is fairly low. So he was having low GI foods. In fact, he'd sit next to me every meal and he'd show me his plate. He said, am I right? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? He only had one little potato and three pieces of sweet potato. I said, yeah, that's good, that's good. And another really good low GI food is legumes, your beans. I met a man who was pre-diabetic when he's 42, he was told to eat legumes every day. He said, I'm 62 now and I never got diabetes. I said, I went straight to the legumes. They're a lovely, consistent, steady delivery of fuel. So let me tell you what happened with Bobby. By the end of 2 weeks, he was down to 10 units of insulin a day. He'd been taking long and short-acting insulin twice a day. 90 units in the day. He was now down to 10. He emailed me 3 months later. He said, I am off all my medication. This is type 1 diabetic. Off all his medication. He said, I have remained a vegan. I have breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and I don't eat again till the next day. Diabetic. 2 meals a day. Because he's eating food that gives that lovely, steady, consistent delivery refuel, which is all your low GI foods. He said, my doctors are astonished. Can you remember what his doctors did? Now, he's a wealthy man. He was able to see the top specialists in the land. Do you remember what they just done? They just said, we can do no more for you. He just spent $1 million on his health in the last 10 years. He said, I'm off all my medication. My doctors are astonished. But listen to what he does. He swims 30 laps a day. He rides his bike 6 miles a day, and he rebounds every day. They're the exercise he must do because he's lost his lymph nodes, remember that? So he can't do exercises that put weight on his legs. He said, I've lost 45 pounds in 3 months. When he went home, his wife, who's 42, he's 62, she said, this is your baby. I like my croissants and champagne. Now, after 3 months watching him, her husband, that she hadn't seen for quite a few years, has returned. After watching him and seeing the results, she became interested. What proved to her that this lifestyle was worth looking at? What he did to himself. I believe it's our responsibility to prove to our doctors that we can do it. Isn't that true? It's an impressive story. He lives the life. When he came, he said, anything you tell me to do, I will do. And he did. He went back to full-time work. He thought his life was over. And his life was back. Now, something else that he stopped was the wheat. When they hybridized the wheat, the starch structure changed. And the starch structure that was created is called amylopectin A. Now, you can read about this in the book Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis. He gives the whole story of what they did to the wheat. Now, amylopectin A is a starch, and it gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast, and then you get that corresponding low. Let me give you something to compare it to. Amylopectin B is found in bananas and potatoes, and that sits quite high in the glycemic index. So it gets the blood sugar level up fairly high, fairly fast, but not as high and not as fast. You see that difference? Amylopectin C, that's the one that's found in the legumes, the beans, the lentils, the lima beans, black eyed peas. It gives a really nice steady rise and a nice steady drop. Every single cell in our body wants that. Now, because the starch structure was changed, it has had a dramatic effect on diabetes. Diabetes has exploded since this hybridized wheat is used. In the 70s, it went worldwide. So by the 1990s, every cereal, bread, cake, pizza, pasta, it's all made out of the hybridized wheat. And look how diabetes has exploded in the last 20 years. So let's look at where it sits on the glycemic index. White. So we'll just say white bread, okay? White bread sits at 69. Above sugar, because of the amylopectin A. So I think you call it whole wheat bread, is that right? Okay, whole wheat. Where does whole wheat sit? Whole wheat sits at 72. Huh? How could that be? Well, because it's not refined, it has more amylopectin A in it. So it goes up higher. And what is every diabetic told to eat? Whole wheat bread, is that right? Whole wheat cereal, whole wheat pasta. why? If this is true, and you can certainly check it out, please do. If this is true, why don't nutritionists tell diabetics to stop wheat? Well, how much wheat does America grow? A lot. So how much wheat does Australia grow? A lot. So can you see, if they tell people to stop eating wheat, they're going to affect the industry, which is unfortunate. So what do you eat? Well, you can still get the ancient grains that haven't been hybridized, Incan corn and spelt. These are called ancient grains. They come from the old original wheat. You can still get those. So it's vital for someone who wants to conquer diabetes that they stop the wheat. One man sent me an email. He said, "You're wrong on the wheat, Barbara. Jesus said he's the bread of life." I wrote back and I said, "You're absolutely right. Jesus is the bread of life, but not the bread of today." And the bread that he refers to back when Jesus was on the earth was often either the sourdough, the cultured leavened bread, or the unleavened bread, and it was made out of the original wheat. But the wheat of today has been changed. You can check it out. There are several books that talk about it. I know Natasha Campbell-McBride, in her book Gut Psychology, she looks at the danger of the wheat and how it even affects brain function. Also, Dr. David Perlmutter, who's a neurologist, he also looks at the effect it has on the brain. And again, Dr. William Davis's book, Wheat Belly, he gives the whole story. You can see it for yourself. So, number 2, and this of course is the temperance law. Some things must stop, and the hybridized wheat must cease. I eat a little wheat, not much, but if I had diabetes, I wouldn't touch it. Once I conquered my diabetes, I could probably have a little bit now and then. But if you've got any almond at all, you can't touch it. Refined sugar, actually all refined sugars. If someone has diabetes, they really can't even handle honey or maple syrup. Not until their pancreas is once again strong. Both the stories I told you were illustrations of how these young man and not so young man gave their pancreases the right conditions, and the pancreases began to revive. And you know they're reviving because both of these found that their blood sugar levels were going too low. What does that mean? They're on too much insulin. They've got to keep reducing back. In fact, at Living Springs last week, we had a lady who was on, I think she was on about 80 or 90 units a day. She stopped everything. She had a little, they can sew a monitor into your arm, and she had a little device that she could tell it was okay. She was excited. See, in a retreat environment, it's safe because we're watching you. We try this. What we did do with this lady at first, we gave her a protein drink at night. We gave her a protein drink in case she woke in the night and her blood sugar levels were low. But she said she only needed it the first night. When she stopped her insulin, she didn't need that protein drink. I was recently at a camp where parents came to me and their little, I think she's 6-year-old, had diabetes, and she had a little monitor also in her arm. And they said, we don't believe in eating between meals, but we're giving her little snacks all day long to try and hold the blood sugar. And, the other kids want them, because when you eat all day long, you certainly disrupt stomach function. We've got one stomach, and you should put the food in and then let it do its job. It'll take 3.5, 4 hours to digest, then it needs an hour break, so we should be leaving 5, 6 hours between meals. So it really disrupts digestion, and when you disrupt digestion, then you interfere with your body being able to access the nutrients in that food. I said, well, what do we do? I said, give her a crystal of salt and a glass of water and get her to run up and down the hill. I saw them a few hours later, they said, it worked. It worked. They said, we are so excited because we just haven't felt right about giving a little snacks all the day. Caffeine interferes with your blood sugar levels. So these are the big blood sugar disruptors. Number 3, hydration is everything. What hydration does is it helps your body access these glycogen stores. So it's absolutely vital that these 8 glasses be taken a day. And salt before each glass. Now, can you remember what I showed you in the heart health lecture? That when you put that magnesium on your tongue, it pulls that water into the cell, and that water helps to access that glycogen store. And here's again where the exercise is vital. And the exercise also helps access, remember, the best diabetics, best kept secret, glycogen. You know, the young man Dan at the end of the 4 weeks, he said to me, why didn't anyone tell me about glycogen? Maybe it's too complicated, but I've made it as simple as I can. But it's not hard to see it, is it? Helps release stored glucose. I'll say stored glucose, that's what your glycogen is. It's little molecules, like a little bunch of grapes of glucose called glycogen. Stored glucose, and that's glycogen. Something else that's important, these are the hours that your body provides. And we're going to look at this in detail tomorrow night when we look at insomnia, which is 8 hours sleep a night. And ideally, that should be, it's in your summertime, so 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. That's your ideal. Yeah, you can do 8:30 to 4:30. Or at a stretch, 9:30 to 5:30, but that's your ideal. And I'll be showing you tomorrow night that if you don't do that, if you can't do that, I'll show you how you can get into that schedule. And when you realize what happens in those hours, you're going to want to be there. You're going to want to be there. That's when your body's healing doubles, actually doubles in those hours. So it helps to revive that poor, overworked pancreas. Remember, when you give it the right conditions, it'll start to revive. So number 6, we need the high fiber. There's no limit on vegetables. Most of your vegetables are low GI, low glycemic index, with the exception of the white potato. It doesn't mean the white potato is out. My husband would die if he couldn't have some white potatoes. You just don't have many. You just have a little. So instead of having 2 potatoes, you might have half a potato or 1.5 sweet pieces of sweet potato. So have the yams. The yams are much lower on the glycemic index. And remember your generous proteins. So your generous proteins are your legumes. You should be eating them every day. Every day have your legumes. Every day have a few nuts after each meal. That's not hard, is it? 8 to 10. A good guide is what fits in your hand. I'm sure Gabriel can fit more in his hand. It's a good guide. Fingertips touch the palm of the hand. One young man said, right fingertips touch the palm of the hand. No, one hand. Most people don't eat nuts every day, and then they'll eat a whole packet when they buy the cashews. So have, it's a nice dessert. Have some nuts at the end of the meal. So your legumes, your nuts and your seeds and your healthy fats, and your nuts and your seeds are an excellent little package of fibre. That delicious chia pudding the other day. It's a great way to have your chia. It's very high in omega-6 and omega-9, they're your brain fats. So let's do a breakfast. What would a diabetic have for breakfast? Well, it depends what you like. My husband likes vegetables. Not everyone likes vegetables for breakfast. My husband then likes sourdough spelt toast. And on the sourdough spelt toast, he'll have avocado. And he'll have red lentils. And it takes me about 15 minutes to cook them. And then some nuts. Now, those, what you've got there is everything there is low GI. It's got some great proteins in the lentils and the nuts. Got some great fats in the avocado. I put some olive oil in the red lentils and in the nuts. That will give a really nice blood sugar level. He used to have a lot of fruit at breakfast. But then he got quite a bad case of tinea, and it was a leftover from heavy antibiotics he'd had in his 30s. He still eats that every day. I initially put him on it to just get that yeast problem under control. And after 6 weeks, he said, do I have to go back to fruit? It's 10 years later, and I still make him that breakfast. You can have it in a salad, you can have steamed vegetables. He has steamed. And I've timed myself. It takes me 3 minutes to put it in the pot. Doesn't take long at all. Now, not everyone's happy with vegetables for breakfast. So let's put breakfast number 2. Breakfast number 2, this is breakfast number 1. Let's look at breakfast number 2. A lot of people today like a smoothie. Now, I'm not fussed on a smoothie, but I know that some of our staff members love their smoothie breakfast. So you want 1 cup of fluid, and coconut water can be great, or you might do organic soy milk or almond milk. So you've got your 1 cup base, and then you might do, now in my book it's got DSTP, do you see that? It's a dessert spoon. So 2 teaspoons is a dessert spoon. I nearly wrote dessert spoon, but I don't, it's because we're English rule, it's an English measurement. So I'm just going to put 2 teaspoons. 2 teaspoons of protein powder, and that protein powder might be a hemp protein powder, it might be a brown rice protein powder, we use pea protein powder. And then you might do 2 teaspoons of chia seed. There's some great omega-3, some great fats in there. And then you might do some berries, low GI. And I think it's nice to put, say, 2 teaspoons of coconut cream. Now, I think you buy it as coconut milk here. Yeah, I'll just say milk. Now, a lot of people like that for breakfast. You might be interested in vegetables. You might not be interested in a smoothie. So a lot of people like to have a porridge for breakfast. That's probably the traditional breakfast, isn't it? So the best one would be millet. Now millet needs a bit more water with it than oats. Probably about 3 cups of water to 1 cup of millet, and you can do it in the crock pot or the slow cooker overnight. So you wake up in the morning and there it is, but it needs to be dressed. And a good low GI sweetener is stewed apple, or I think you call it applesauce. Yeah? Stewed apple. Granny Smith apples are nice, they're really low GI. And then you might have coconut cream on that. Or if you're not fussed on coconut cream, you might have an organic soy milk. And then you might put some chia seeds. And then on top of that, you might put some ground flax seeds, ground flax, and you might also put some nuts. That's quite low GI too. It's important to eat what you like. Mm-hmm.
What is millet?
It's a grain. I suppose rice, or you could do brown rice, or you could do quinoa. Millet, quinoa, and brown rice are alkaline grains, they're gluten-free grains. So they're a superior grain to oats. If you like oats, we find about 30% of people can't handle oats that well, but if you call it oatmeal, don't you? Well, my suggestion is have oatmeal every second day, have millet on the other days. What about lunch? So that's quite a king-size breakfast. There's your breakfast like a king. But those 3 breakfasts will give you a very nice, steady, sure delivery of fuel. What about lunch? So lunch, I think variety is the spice of life. Salad, and there's so many different salads you can have. We had a kale salad today. Some tomato, lemon and olive oil, and some grated carrot. Always have your avocado. Avocados is a great low GI fruit. So basically with salad, it's what you like. And vegetables, things can be baked or steamed or stir-fried. And then your protein can be some sort of legume. And if you do, and you might have a grain with that, so your grain, that certainly is protein, but just has more carbohydrates. You might have quinoa. Look, I've got some legume recipes. And the reason I put legume recipes in there, because most people don't have cooked beans. It's important that they're soaked. It's important that they're rinsed. If you don't have time, you can soak them all day and put in the crock pot overnight. So there's ways that you can do it easier. And of course, ending the meal with a nice dessert of 8 to 10 nuts. I have found with some of the diabetics, at first they might need a protein drink at night. So you gauge that. And this is how the 2 men, the one young, the one a little older, and the lady in last program were able to get off their medication, conquer their diabetes, and yet manage their blood sugars very nicely. Aren't you glad it's so easy? Are there any questions as we close? Yes. Yeah, what's the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes? Type 1 diabetic, the beta cells that produce insulin have been damaged, and it is said that they can never recover, but we have seen type 1s recover. Whereas type 2 diabetic, it's really a lifestyle, and it's usually because they've just indulged too many carbohydrates and really just worn their pancreases out. Some other brands, I'm going to give you a website, and this is a young man that sells the most beautiful gluten-free bread. It's www.simpleneeds, and the needs is KNEADS.com. His name's Tristan, and he's a young Christian man with a family. It's his family business, and he makes beautiful bread. And he will ship, I think he's in North Carolina. But he will ship all over the US. But it's beautiful bread. It's the nicest gluten-free bread I've tasted. I think he has kabul bread, he has quinoa bread, he has a few varieties. But if you go to that, you will see the varieties. What about sprouted wheat breads? The sprouting of the bread does break down the protein or the gluten in the grain. The sourdough bread breaks down the protein or the gluten in the grain. So the sprouting does that. There's a bread called the Ezekiel bread, which is sprouted wheat. It has a different effect because you've broken it down somewhat in the sprouting process. Yeah, it's borderline. Okay, thank you for your attention. A little bit over. So I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night, where we find out how to prevent osteoporosis and heal osteoporosis, how to get strong bones. And also tomorrow night we're going to be looking at sleep, how we sleep, why we need to sleep 8 hours, and what happens if we don't. So you'll find that very interesting too. So I see our raffles coming up.